From the night that's Alone Together. You're with Julian on the Brown Note and a review belatedly of Nosferatu as it's out on streaming. And the director Robert Eggers has an impeccable filmography so far. He really is showing himself to be at the vanguard. He hasn't put a foot wrong. I mean, The Witch was one of my films of the decade, and I think alongside Hereditary and Mandy, I think were my three favourite horrors of the last decade. An amazing film, followed by a very avant-garde film called The Lighthouse with Robert Pattinson, and Willem Dafoe not getting an Oscar nomination for that was absolutely criminal. One of his best ever performances, and he shows up here again as well. But I will say I think it is not as brilliant as everyone makes out. I don't understand how people are saying that it's his best work. It's a unique film, but I think that overall it was probably a bit less rewarding than the other three films. The Northman is his most underrated film. That was my second favourite film of 2022. The original Hamlet story, as in the story that hundreds of years after it was written, that William Shakespeare developed into the story of Hamlet via Lord of the Rings and a lot of other stuff. I thought it was an amazing film. And all his films are, nothing is set in the modern age so far. He does very historical films, and he's come up with Nosferatu, which is a remake of the original Nosferatu. Was it Murnau? F.W. Murnau in 1922. Made a version of the Bram Stoker story Dracula, which was written 25 years before that, ish, and basically broke copyright laws. So that very famous of the film of the spindly version of Dracula, rather than the more loquacious and romanticized and sexual version of Dracula that would appear in the probably from the Christopher Lee era and the 1970s Hammer sort of Dracula, that is probably the most famous version of Dracula now. They created this film. It was a huge success, and then the estate of Bram Stoker basically kiboshed it 4 years after it was released, and they had to destroy all the copies, which is why for many years there was this famous footage of that rat-faced demonic Dracula going up a staircase at high speed, because one of the only versions of the film they had at that time was a actually sped up version of the film. But in the modern era they've managed to restore it to a degree, but he basically remakes that. So it's not the story of a good-looking Dracula, enticing people into his world, nor the Bram Stoker Dracula that Francis Ford Coppola made, which is still pretty iconic. It's somewhere on its own. It is a remake of that film, and it employs a lot of the visual artistry that was present in that very famous film. But it's a very sort of bleak, austere version of Dracula, and possibly not with quite enough story to get it over the line. It stars Nicholas Hoult, who's married to Lily Rose Depp, and he's trying to make his way in the world. We see at the start Lily Rose Depp is a teenager who's suffering from a great deal of anxiety about the world and everything, and unknowingly makes a pact. She wants to have someone love her, and unknowingly that awakens the character of Count Orlok, who is Dracula in this film. I wonder how they did the copyright this time around. Does it say based on a story by Bram Stoker this time? Based on both the Nosferatu, A Symphony of Horror, which was the original film, and Dracula by Bram Stoker. She makes this pact as a teenager wanting to be eternally loved and saved from her listless, anxiety-fueled life, and that awakens this Count Orlok, who thinks, and in this netherworld, all the way from Transylvania, that she has made a commitment to him and that she now belongs to him. And it wakes him up in his Transylvanian castle, and we see a Transylvania that is plagued by vampires and Romany gypsies that fight them. That's not really delved into, but it is part of the story. But Nicholas Holt's character is sent to Count Orlok, who wants to buy a mansion in London, and it's all put out that he's a huge client of theirs, it's a big deal, and it will make Nicholas Hoult, who's everywhere now, and I think he's a really good actor. He was in The Order. I don't think I put a review online, but that's a great film that came out recently. He's in about 3 films that have come out in the last 2 months, which he's really good in all of them. I think he's a terrific actor. From things like The Menu and so on, he's really... And Juror Number 2, that was another one I didn't review, which came out just before Christmas, the latest Clint Eastwood one. He's terrific in that. He's a unsung great actor, and if Timothée Chalamet wins an Oscar for... It doesn't matter, I'll go into that in another day. So he heads off to Transylvania to close this deal with a very important client, who is Count Orlok, played by another fascinating Bill Skarsgård, has also put through a very interesting filmography, not always working, but always interestingly strange. And I think The Crow was my second worst film of last year. But I thought those 3 are excellent in this film. They're really good performances in weird... Like, Bill Skarsgård went through throat singing lessons and everything to lower the tone of his voice and present this fascinating count who's dressed in like military regalia from centuries before and so on. And he gets Nicholas Hoult to sign his own nefarious contract, which he can't read because it's all in either Romanian or some ancient version of a language that was in that region, which is nothing to do with property of the bricks and mortar kind and so on. And the rest of the film is Count Orlok basically trying to arrive in England and to take ownership of his prize, which is Lily Depp. And Aaron Taylor-Johnson is kind of out of his depth at times and kind of really good at others. There are times when he feels a little bit closer to the Keanu Reeves character in the Bram Stoker, but other times he's actually really good. Willem Dafoe is in a perfunctory yet strong role. The real star, I thought the lead 3 were excellent here, but the stars of this show are undoubtedly the cinematography and the soundtrack and the costume design. And all 3 would be worthy winners above the likes of June for Oscars. The cinematography, which is done in a very storybook style and at times is a little bit too, this is the original 1922 version, is breathtaking. The cinematography itself, it would be worth watching by John Blasky, who I'm imagining did he did The Lighthouse. So that's the only Robert Eggers film he did, which is very vividly shot. And this is very different. It's very colourful. It's very beautiful to look at. And it's like turning the pages of a horror novel, comic book, basically, at times. It's stunning to look at. And the music by Robert Carolan is absolutely superb as well. I think both of those and the costume design have all been nominated for Oscars, and rightly so. And it's good to see that this film has been a very big financial success. I wouldn't imagine The Lighthouse would have been, or any of his films. I think The Witch did all right, but the last 2 haven't. But the most interesting thing about this in comparison to the other Robert Eggers films is how, like, going into it, I expected it to be a challenging art house film, and it is a huge amount of fun. From the word go, it is a great deal of fun. It's also quite funny. It's done in a very heightened operatic style in the way that the characters deliver their lines, and it's shot, which makes it, actually, I thought it was a very amusing film, a very easy film to watch. It's not like the most easy film to watch if you haven't seen his previous films, but it's actually quite entertainingly fun, which I thought was a great thing. On the downside, I thought that it was a little bit slight in the story. I'm not sure how long the original film was. Let's have a look. Yes, dependent on version, 63 to 94 minutes. There wasn't too much in the way of story. Lily Rose Depp, I thought, was very, very good in the role. She balanced quite well in a quite kind of difficult role. She could have been just a very bog standard heroine, but I thought she was much more interesting than that. And it builds up to a nice climax as well. The film builds up to a very good sort of crescendo to end on. So I thought this was great. I thought it was a lot of fun. I thought it was probably above The Lighthouse, which a lot of people are going to disagree with. I thought The Northman and The Witch were better films overall, with more substance and meat on their bones, and this one reliant on a little bit more of the superficiality of how amazing it looks and sounds. But overall, Nosferatu, I will give a solid 8.5 out of 10.